everyone. I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet, and I am bringing you another movie review today. This time it is rather special because I was, this past weekend, sent my first ever screener from the creators of a film, and that film, of course, if you've read the title of this video, is CarousHELL the Second, and this movie is a film that just came out this year and is pretty evidently from the title a sequel to the movie CarousHELL. I tend to be the person who, if one of the movies I'm reviewing is a sequel, will generally go back and review the other movies leading up to that film in the franchise. However, in this particular instance, just in terms of schedule being crazy and being a little bit tired and what all, I did not end up filming a review of the first CarousHELL, but I also don't know what else I would have said in that video because when I did initially watch the first CarousHELL sometime a few months back earlier this year, I wrote out a little review of that on Letterboxd, which pretty much encapsulates most of my thoughts on the film. Not everything I would go into in a full review, but covers most of what I would say in a full-length review, or at least the most important parts. So I will link, if at all possible, either in the cards or in the description, my Letterboxd review of the first CarousHELL. But the basic gist of my review for that movie is I didn't love it, but I did have some fun with it. I thought the practical effects were really good. I thought the way Duke was able to pull weapons out of nowhere was really funny. And the character of Joe is still my favorite character in the whole of everything pertaining to CarousHELL. That makes no sense if you have seen neither film, but I will give context in a second. Anyway, CarousHELL 2, like the first CarousHELL, was directed by Steve Rudzinski, and besides the two CarousHELL movies, he has directed a series of Meowie holiday movies. So there's one called A Meowie Christmas, A Meowie Christmas Vacation, A Meowie St. Patrick's Day, and they're all just, from what I've gathered, I haven't watched any of them, holiday movies with cute cats, so there's that. And he's also directed movies such as Everyone Must Die and a 2014 film called Red Christmas, not pertaining to the other Red Christmas that other people are probably familiar with. I think there are actually a lot of movies called Red Christmas, so do with that information what you will. And this film stars Steve Rimpici, I'm going with Rimpici, I'm sorry if I've butchered your name, who once again provides the voice of Duke and was also in Bullseye, a 2013 version of War of the Worlds, a film called Chlorine, and has been a voice actor in numerous TV shows and video games. Aline Isley, who is also in a ton of other movies made by Steve Rudzinski, as well as the short film Lockdown, and playing a, from what I gathered from IMDb, minor role on the horror host TV show Dead and Buried Treasures. Joshua Antoon, who is in A Meowie Christmas Vacation, as well as Captain Z and the Terror of Leviathan, both Steve Rudzinski movies, and the Barnaby I can't read my own handwriting again. This is getting to be a serious issue. It looks like it could be Barnaby or Barnaby. Mash together my words on the paper, so I will put the correct name somewhere down here. Once again, my greatest apologies for butchering everyone's names, but she was in A Meowie Christmas, The Survivors, which, if I'm remembering correctly, is another Steve Rudzinski movie, as well as participating in a fan dub of one of the mini installments of Final Fantasy, and being an assistant animator on Of Frogs and Gods, and I think that's literally all of her IMDb credits, so wanted to fit everything in there because I could. This film picks up where the first CarousHELL left off, and just to briefly recap that film, a carousel unicorn named Duke is just done with getting slobbered on by kids and just generally not being treated with the respect he deserves, so he chooses to leave the carousel and go on a freaking killing spree. This movie picks up where that film left off, and after a bunch of ridiculous shenanigans in that movie, discovers that he now has a child with a human woman. Don't worry, it's not that bad because he's technically a human being in the body of a carousel horse, so it's actually still kind of bad. But he has a kid named Robbie who he unites with and has to learn to bring up, and at the same time he is having flashes of his past and where he came from and why he is a human soul in the body of a carousel horse, all of which has to do with Nazis trying to create some kind of weapon. Nazis, because they're evil and stupid, have somehow, in spite of their absolute ineptness at everything in this movie, managed to keep themselves alive up until the present day and are trying to track down Duke. The score for this film was done by Mike Treblecock. Once again, don't know if I'm pronouncing anything correctly at all, but he also scored the movies Exorcism of the Dead, Beneath the Old Dark House, and Dino Gore. And his score for this film is very over the top and swelling and cinematic, and really fits the film in that it never says, oh, we're being silly, necessarily. It just really kind of tries to hype up the over-dramaticness of every situation by being overly swelling and cinematic and dramatic, or overly heartfelt and sentimental, while there's just ridiculous things happening on screen. So it's more or less playing it straight, so to speak, and I think it emphasizes a lot of the humor in the film. It's not the most memorable score in the world, but it works. The one thing that is memorable about it that I really do like is the return of the main CarousHELL theme from the first movie, which I really liked in that film and is a really enjoyable motif in the score of this film, because it gets brought back during the opening credits with this kind of epic, kind of electronic, sort of dark, warlike, I guess, feel to it that was fun. And also, when we are talking about Robbie, Duke's adorable son, we get this cutesy little lullaby version of the CarousHELL theme that I really liked. Story-wise, this film has things going for it that I really like, and things going for it that don't work for me as much. All of it's ridiculous, but some of it works in its ridiculousness for me and some of it doesn't. So on one side of it, you've got this child that Duke has had in the previous movie and is now interacting with, and there's this sort of kind of dynamic of this little innocent doe-eyed child who literally doesn't know what murder is, and someone suddenly put in the position of having to be a parent who might not be the best role model, but is trying to love their child, I guess. It's a very similar dynamic, albeit different in some ways, to what we get in Seed of Chucky, except this in some ways is more ridiculous than Seed of Chucky, in my opinion, because Seed of Chucky, even though it's honestly not grounded at all, still feels kind of more grounded and dark than this movie, probably because Seed of Chucky had significantly more budget to it and was already part of a semi-serious horror franchise, which CarousHELL is not. But I really liked the kind of tensions and relationships between characters that specifically Duke has to navigate just within this absolutely ridiculous context. And I like his character arc from being just pure evil, indiscriminate murderer to still being evil, indiscriminate murderer, but having this kind of soft spot for his son that is actually adorable. I'm less jazzed about Duke's backstory. I understand its place in the film and the way it creates a lot of what this movie's plot is, but it's the less fun part of the movie for me. I don't know why it had to be Nazis, except I kind of do, and in a way I really respect that, because whereas in the first movie, Duke obviously kills indiscriminately, but there were just certain kills that were clearly played for laughs, and I wasn't sure if I found it funny or not. I was just like, I don't know about this. In this movie, pretty much the whole setup of evil Nazis is this excuse for Duke to just murder the shit out of a bunch of Nazis at the end of the movie, and that did make me very happy. But that, of course, being said, the use of Nazis and references to World War II, and luckily there are no Holocaust jokes in this. I didn't expect them to go there, but I was a little worried about that. But yeah, using Nazis in anything that's comedic is always kind of dicey. All in all, it was still not as comfortable and fun as I think it should have been whenever they were on screen, simply by proxy of them being Nazis. But it is entirely, very clearly meant to be making fun of them, and does so very well at points. They have a spy who's supposed to be a master of disguise who is an absolute idiot and just goes around in all of these different disguises trying to kidnap Robbie, and every time he goes up to Duke, he's like still clearly got this thick, over-the-top, ridiculous German accent, and he just gives his whole completely fictionalized life story to Duke without him ever asking for it. And he's just like gotten so hardcore into his character that he really wants to just go for it and tell his whole story because he's so proud of this stupid character he's created. And in terms of a lot of the humor in this movie in general, it all kind of has the same tone, and once again, some of it works for me and some of it doesn't, because all of it is very intentionally dumb, pretty much. And it is very overtly self-aware of how ridiculous everything is and really plays that to the camera. It is very much like all but winking to the camera, and there are a few scenes where Duke does directly speak to the audience, and that can be funny, and some of it is also just really eye-roll worthy. And a great example of that for me is the whole sequence of Klaus trying to kidnap Robbie and pretending to be all of these different people, and each time going on this long-winded backstory rant, each time with the same ridiculous music behind it, and Duke being like, dude, just stop. I just want to, buy whatever you're selling me and get on with it. And on the one hand, I really appreciate the commitment to this ridiculous bit that they set up, and I can tell that they're having fun doing it and going all the way with it. But at the same time, I'm kind of in Duke's position where it's just like, we've been through these motions like 2 times already, and I just want to get a move on into the other insanity that's in this movie, rather than just going through this guy's array of stupid characters. And the other big thing that I didn't find funny was the number of Reich puns that Duke makes towards the climax of the movie, where he's just going after the Nazis. I get what they were going for, and they are accompanied by some of the best things in the movie, but I was just groaning at some point, and they're going for that level of cheesiness, and they succeeded in it. But sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's just like, really, really. And the other thing that kind of highlights that aspect of the film for me is the editing, because some scenes are very deliberately just dragged out to be uncomfortable and ridiculous and go on for too long. And I know what they're going for, and maybe sometimes it was a little bit funny. There's one point in particular where Duke is alone and he's just like, shit, nobody's here to appreciate my puns anymore, and I liked that. And there is one scene where it's clearly lingering longer than something like this usually would, just to show off this really cool practical effect that they've created, and I liked that. But at other points, it just felt like it was lingering a little bit too long on things for my liking. I also really didn't need to see Robbie getting tortured like that. It's not, super over the top or anything, but it's just this overly cruel, horrific little moment in a otherwise relatively campy movie, and it just felt kind of out of place to me and took me out of the ridiculous feel of the movie, because I was just like, no, poor Robbie. The one thing the first movie did have going for it was that it was paced a lot more like a slasher movie, because it is a slasher movie, and so there were a lot more kills happening all the time. In this movie, Duke's trying to take care of his son and is kind of trying his best not to kill people while his son is in his presence, kind of a la Seed of Chucky, except Duke actually does this willingly, more or less, although he's still, sneaking off and killing people. So there are far less kills in this movie, but when they do happen, they are a lot of fun, and there are a lot of great little homages to other movies in here. There is a scene with an obnoxious Karen character who gets killed in this very overt homage to The Burning. I'm not even going to spoil my favorite kill in the movie for you, because it's that good, but it is an homage to a particularly notorious kill from the Friday the 13th franchise, but with a little twist that was just the best. And the way Duke is just able to inexplicably pull out weapons from nowhere is also really fun too, although they do technically with their lore explain that. And that's the other thing. I'm saying a lot of things I didn't like about this movie, even though I did like this film. I find the whole backstory that they give Duke and the reason he is able to pull weapons out of nowhere and this and that interesting, but one of my favorite things about the first movie is the way Duke seems to just come alive and start killing people and start manifesting weapons out of nowhere purely out of spite and rage and with no logical explanation. The way they do their bit of world building in this movie is clever and works for the tone of this film, but it did take that element that I liked from the first movie away. Finally, in regards to plot, there is a little bit of setup for another sequel that's, I'll be honest, I would watch the hell out of. Character-wise, I've kind of covered most of the Nazi characters. I'll get into a few others that I didn't mention already. Robbie is just the absolute best. He's the heart of this movie by far. He's just this pure, innocent little child who is part human, part CarousHELL unicorn, and because of that is a little bit of an outsider, and he kind of brings the genuinely, just sweet little pieces of dialogue into the film and is like, I kind of feel like an outsider too, Dad. He actually brings these kind of sweet little heartfelt moments of dialogue into the film about being an outsider, but also just loving people unconditionally, and it's very touchy-feely and kind of played for laughs when juxtaposed against just the awful shit that Duke has done to people, but there is a genuine bit of heart that I think the character of Robbie actually brings to the film, and he's also just really cute. And the way Duke has changed and continues to change in this film from the character that he was in the first movie, I find very interesting, because in the first movie, we are essentially following Duke from the beginning still, but everything in general is just much more aggressively morally gray, because our main characters, while not particularly likable, are just a bunch of kids doing stupid kid stuff who happen to piss off Duke just enough for him to leave his carousel and go on a killing spree. In this movie, Duke is much more of a borderline hero, but still very much anti-hero, and we're very clearly rooting for him. Whereas in the first movie, you're still seemingly low-key supposed to be rooting for him, but he's also the slasher villain who's being hunted by Cowboy Cool, who's this Dr. Loomis type character. It's weird. In this movie, he becomes the central, almost action hero type character, and also we get this very kind of mushy paternal side of him that at first I thought was kind of gonna be this facade that he puts on, kind of the way Chucky does with Glenn Glenda in Seed of Chucky, but as it goes on, there's just this genuine, unconditional love for his child that I thought was kind of sweet, even though he's still going around murdering people. There was a surprising bit of queer representation in this film that I'm just not going to spoil for you. It goes some places that are questionable and weird, but also kind of amazing. If you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about, but I didn't expect it. It was weird. It was a little bit uncomfortable, but ultimately I am delighted by the fact that it's in the movie. It was entertaining and nice. And kind of going back to the Nazi characters, I really liked that pretty much all of them are just absolute morons. And then there's their leader, Ilsa, who is also kind of an idiot, but in order to kind of make her the final boss character of the movie, the ultimate big bad, she has these dark magic powers and is a little bit more of a badass in some ways, which I completely understand in terms of having a more threatening main villain and raising the stakes a little bit for the climax of the movie. But as I kind of said a while back casually when talking to some people about Hellboy, where one of the main villains is also a Nazi, I love having a badass threatening villain, but when like real life horror and tragedy is put on top of that, I feel less great about being like, wow, that's cool, because it's also not. I mean, she loses at the end of the movie, so minor spoiler alert, I wouldn't be talking about this movie now if the Nazis won. And finally, in regards to the characters, we get some more nods back to Pete's Pizza, the pizza place from the first movie, and I just feel so bad for anyone who has to work there. Effects-wise, this movie has what made the first movie really great, and then some, to be honest, because Duke is still literally just a carousel unicorn with absolutely no articulation whatsoever, and he looks stupid, and I absolutely love him. And then the practical gore effects have all of this really great care put into them. They're still cheesy looking, but they're very well crafted and really fun, and one of the high points of the movie. And then Robbie was by far the high point of the movie for me, effects-wise, because he actually looks amazing. That's probably because he's actually a carousel horse human hybrid. So he's got a little mouth that moves. And the thing that just really sold him for me was the way his eyes blink occasionally. And he's still cheesy looking, still obviously artificial, but he's kind of lifelike in the same way the Muppets are. And he's just so precious, and I love him. And all in all, I have similar thoughts on this movie to the first one, but I think I like it just a little bit more. The one thing I did like about the first one is just, one, the inexplicability of Duke and the way he seems to just be out there out of pure rage and spite, as well as the more constant creative kills and more consistently slashery tone. This one kind of veers off into something different, but in doing so, it kind of brings this interesting heart to the film while still having the weird, mean-spirited humor of the first film. I don't absolutely love either of the movies, but I did have a lot more appreciation for a lot of elements in this movie than I did when I watched the first Carousel, and watching this movie makes me want to go back and watch the first one again, and it has given me new appreciation for the first movie. So neither one of these movies are perfect by any means, but I do recommend checking out both of them, especially if you like super campy, super low budget indie horror. And if you do want to check out this movie for yourself, I do not know if it's on any streaming services or anything. I have not checked. It probably is, but you can buy this movie and the first one as well on physical media. And I know that the first one is on services such as Prime and Tubi. So I will try to link places to buy Blu-rays of the first two movies in the description below. And once again, just a huge thank you to the creators of CarousHELL II for sending me the screener copy to watch and review. That is my review of CarousHELL II. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye.